Hello, I'm Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and I'm joined by a repeat guest, a rarity on this YouTube channel. Mitchell, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about the topic of why don't all games have X? And we'll fill in that blank throughout this video.
Thank you for having me. After having me the last time, I wasn't sure you were going to have me back. I didn't know. We had such a good time. Does he like me anymore? Does he want to call me again? No, this is great. Thank you for having me. I'm excited about this in particular because you are uniquely qualified to answer these questions, I think. And once we talk about what it's going to be, I think people will get why you're the perfect person to talk with about this.
Yeah, you reached out to me with this topic, and I thought it was a really good one, especially since you wanted to put a positive spin on it. I think you had seen a video a while ago from another content creator that got you thinking, which is good. But they had their topic was basically why doesn't every game have this? And
correct.
My perception is they were kind of ragging on games that didn't have stuff. Whereas today, we're going to talk about 7 different categories of things that are in some games, but not every game. And we're going to talk a little bit about, you're going to share some examples of games that you really appreciate that they have this specific thing or this specific element. And then you're going to ask me, and maybe theorize a little bit yourself, why don't all games have this? This seems like something that all games could have. Why don't they have it?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give it like a quick bit of context, and anytime we love something, whether it's your favorite sports team or in this case, board games, you tend to, focus on it. We tend to get a little myopic about it sometimes and micromanage like, oh, okay, wouldn't it be great if like, why don't they trade that player, bring this player in? And the same thing with the board games. We look at them, we love them. We have our favorite, publishers and designers like yourself. And we're like, okay, wouldn't it be great if, and I saw a lot of these videos, people saying, why doesn't every game have this element? And of course, there's got to be a reason, or there has to be a reason, or else every game would have all of these things. And those reasons could be financial, they could be logistics, they could be eco-friendliness, they could be, there are a variety of different reasons, which is why you, as a huge game fan who loves to champion, you obviously you talk about Stonemaier, but you love to champion other people's games, talk about the mechanisms you love, and talk about the components that you love, but you also know from a publisher/designer side why you may not be able to do that for this particular game, and why, spending the money on this or putting the time to this may not be, cost effective, money effective. So, it's just, you were the perfect person to talk about this way.
Well, and part of my hope for this video too, because I think a global answer to maybe all of these is that for me and for other publishers too, we may not think about it. We may not realize it. Like we think about making our games as good as they possibly can be, but there are a lot of little details that we're going to get into today that just may not have occurred to someone. And certainly we will mention some Stonemaier games that have these elements, but others don't. And sometimes there's a reason, and sometimes just because I didn't think of it for that game, or I didn't think of a way to make it work for that game. And so this video is going to be a great reminder for me to come back to and be like, oh yeah, I wish I need to put this in every game because it makes sense to be in the game, if there's a way to do it.
If there's a way to, absolutely, yes. And then I could look at that and I'll see your next game have this and I'll go, you're welcome, America and all the world. You're welcome for this. This video made it happen.
Exactly. So let's give this a try. This is not rehearsed. We're going to jump in and just see how it goes.
You got it.
Yeah, let's start with category 1. So the first category is the category of packaging. So the things that we'll talk about, that we'll think about here, are games having an insert, some sort of organizational system, instructions for how to organize things in the insert, shrink wrap cards. When decks of cards are shrink wrapped, why don't they all have little tearaway strips that make them easier to open up? Why don't all games have eco-friendly packaging? Like why do we even use shrink wrap at all? And what about box sizes? Boxes that hold everything, boxes that are too big or too small. Like why are some boxes the right size and others aren't? And yeah, so that's the general category. Mitchell, why don't you share a few examples that go into this category?
Okay, so just starting real quick with the insert is a big deal to me. And at this point, I've played so many games over the years, and you've played many, many more. And we always used to joke like some games from amazing publishers, and they were amazing games. And you'd open the box and it's just a bunch of stuff thrown in the box, sometimes in a bag, sometimes not. And it would go all over the place. And I would always say to myself, man, what's the big deal about putting an insert? Is it really that big of a deal? And it doesn't have to be, we love game trays, know what Game Trays designs beautiful stuff, but not every publisher can afford to put a game tray in their game. And I understand that. So it doesn't have to be a fancy, beautiful system, but I always wondered why there wasn't something in there. Was it always cost related? Was it related to just, again, the eco-friendliness? And it doesn't have to be plastic. It can be paper. It can be something. So I was trying to figure out why and I guess you're going to answer this in a second too. So I just want to talk about a couple of good examples of like some less expensive games. Because again, there's this idea that it's going to add a lot to the cost. And I get it that it always does to put something else in. But the two that I was looking at was Century Golem Edition, a small box game, of course, in the Century Spice Road, world, and Night of the Ninja, which is a great party game that plays up to 11 players. And again, both of these games, not big games, more importantly, not very expensive games, but they both have this great insert that keeps everything organized, keeps everything in their place. And for me, it's not just a gamer thing. Like aesthetically, I like things organized. I like that things have a place to go. But even when I buy a game, if I'm buying a game on Amazon, and as you know, Jamie, a lot of publishers sell their games on Amazon. They sell large amounts, then Amazon will sell them to the public. When those games don't have an insert, a lot of times when they get shipped and people are just throwing them in trucks, throwing them in bigger boxes to ship them in, the stuff gets rattled around and it gets damaged. So I wonder, and again, and you can answer this, how important is that when people are, even though you've already sold the games to Amazon, if people are returning those games to Amazon because they're damaged, because they don't have a proper insert to keep them just organized, I wonder, does that play into something too financially? Is there a downside financially to not putting an insert in because of the damage? And then the retailer saying, well, we get a lot of returns on these because of a damaged stuff. Do you ever hear back from that? Or have you heard from other publishers that stuff gets damaged because it doesn't have an insert?
Lots of great thoughts there. Yeah, I guess for that last question, we do get some returns, but usually, and sometimes, yes, I think sometimes they are related to components shifting around and getting damaged due to them being able to shift around in the box. And oftentimes that is related to a lack of an organizational factor. It isn't always about an insert. Like we talk in games where we maybe have a tray here. I'll pull up Wingspan here, where we have a tray in Wingspan, but not a full insert.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. You remember that?
I've played with that. Yes.
We try to package, and we try to have Panda, our manufacturer, package things so that they can't slide around in the box before they get to the consumer for the first time. Especially like we put the decks of cards in Wingspan, or at least they should be put in the tray itself, in their little shrink wrap, or however they're packaged inside that tray, so that they can't slide around the entire box. Yeah, because that can be an issue. And I think the key is maybe not so much the economics of the returns, but that we want people to have a good first impression and a first good experience when they unbox the game for the first time. Yeah. I mean, you've told this to me. I think that there are many times where you have a lot of fun from unboxing the game, and you may not be able to, you might play it for a while, but you have that fun unboxing experience. We want that to be fun and not devastating when you see a broken component out of the gate.
No, of course. And of course, the organizers in general, having an insert in general does make the game easier to get to the table, makes it easier to pack back up, which, makes people play the games more often. And again, there's the eco-friendly side of it. And again, I think there's a game called Hamlet, the village building game, that actually includes these little cardboard strips that you build into its own insert. And of course, incredibly eco-friendly. And, we could talk about the eco-friendliness, of course, of shrink wrap versus paper wrap of the cards, which you did bring up. I'm a huge fan. And, you guys have been doing the paper wrap as well, and experimenting with different ways, safer ways, more eco-friendly ways to pack your games. And I'm a huge fan. I know some people feel like if it's not shrink wrap, it doesn't stay safe. In fact, it can be the opposite. And I know this sounds ridiculous, and maybe it says something bad about me. I've actually damaged cards trying to get a shrink wrap off. I'm not talking about using an X-Acto knife, which has its own little, a little dangerous there too, but just trying to get the shrink wrap off because it doesn't have the little pull tab on there. Even with the pull tab, doesn't always come off properly. I've had an easier time with the safe paper wrapping. Not only is it eco-friendly, the cards come out quicker. I've never had a damaged card. So for me, it's a twofold victory. Yes, you get the eco-friendliness, but they're much easier. So I think sometimes the eco-friendly way is not only great for the environment, but it also makes it easier on the gamers to unwrap their games and get them to the table safer and faster.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that is absolutely my experience too. And you're right. Even I think there are different types of shrink wrap, like different thicknesses and different machines that are putting it around the decks of cards. And sometimes even with that easy peel strip, it actually isn't all that easy to use. And so I've had much better success With currently the method, like there is like the paper strip around the cards.
Yes.
That's fine. We found that would sometimes rub off on the cards. I think it's a good
Right,
middle
right.
ground, but we've moved towards a very thin paper that completely envelops the deck of cards. So completely protects it. Like you said, it's very easy to tear it off, and then you recycle it. And
let's face it, it looks super classy. That paper
Yeah.
wrapping on there just looks super classy. It looks like,
Yeah.
you know, you get like a bento box, just beautiful, like rice paper look to it. It looks gorgeous.
So let's dig into real quick, why don't all games have these things?
Yes.
I'll try to be brief, and feel free to let me know if you want me to elaborate any more. So for
No,
the
go for it.
insert, you're right. Sometimes it is economics of adding a really, really fancy insert, but inserts are not all that expensive to add. A simple plastic or simple cardboard insert, they're not all that expensive to add. The difficult thing that I found with inserts is that the best time to design an insert is after all the components are 100% final. Up until that point, there are still, like, even after you send the final files to the printer, things can change after that just make it difficult to figure out the exact configuration for the insert, how everything will fit, and you need to test it after that. So that is really the biggest barrier, in my opinion, to inserts and trays and component and any sort of organizational feature, that it takes time, and you can't really do it in depth until the game is 100% complete. And it's for that same reason that we often don't see, and we have them on some of our games. We have it on Wingspan, for example. We're talking about that, where on the side of the box, it shows you how to organize things in the insert. Some games do this in a really fancy way. For crowdfunding games, I love it because they have extra time to do it. They have these beautiful, elaborate ways of how to organize the insert, how to put things
stacking,
back in there.
and
Right. You see like the 3D images of them doing that. But that is like, that even happens after you've designed the insert. And oftentimes for a game like Wingspan, we've already printed the paper, at least, that wraps around the box by the time that we figured out what the inserts and the trays are and how the game is organized. So
I got you.
Yeah, very end of the line things that we're dealing with the organizational elements.
See, that's something I just want to jump in. That's something the average gamer doesn't know. They don't know. They don't know the order in which things are done. They don't know the domino effect of if this, then this, and how that affects the whole design process. So it's good for us to hear that. And it makes me wonder if in the future, not just for you guys, because again, Stonemaier is not the problem here. Believe me, when it comes to this stuff, Stonemaier is not the problem. But for other designers / other publishers, maybe doing something like the folks that designed or that published Hamlet, where you do these sort of crisscross folded cardboard things that really can be adjusted to any size. They're just basic. They just make these basic cutout cubes almost for each thing, where you can just put the bag of bits, put some cards in there. Even if they're not perfect, even if they're not exactly the right shape, they can still keep things separate so they're not banging against each other in shipping, or banging against each other when you store them in your own, in your own calyx, wherever you're putting them. So that could be a solution that is not quite as specific, but at least gives some protection in shipping and in organizing. So that could be something that works.
Well, let's touch about the one other element of this at the very end that does impact inserts and whatnot. I guess we talked about shrink wrap already. It just requires your manufacturer to have the machine to do it. It's an expensive, like, one-time purchase. Once they have the machine, they can do it. But the size of the box. So there are boxes that are, some might see them as too big. There's too much space in this box. It takes too much space on my shelf. But the good side of that is that it can hold, it can hold expansion content. It can hold everything that the game is perhaps ever comes out with. The flip side is a box that is really small. It conserves shelf space. That can be great. But then you add sleeved cards, or you add an expansion, and suddenly everything doesn't fit. Where do you fall on that spectrum? What is your hope from publishers for the size of the box?
Oh, wow. It's tough. I go both ways on this. I like what I think this is something that you've done really well, especially if you look at something like Expeditions, where you see everything is in there. You don't look at it and see a bunch of empty space, like a cutout for it. Like, where's that extra figure? If they designed that space, they must have designed the extra miniature. Why isn't it there now? You know what I mean? That kind of thought. So, but Expeditions, there was room for the expansion, but it wasn't an obvious section of the game that was missing from the original that made you think, well, where's the rest of the game? So I like when the games have enough room to put extra stuff in,
Mhm.
without making the box too terribly big that it looks like you're underselling the original product. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes gamers get this idea, like when there's that silhouette missing. Well, does that
Mhm.
mean I didn't get the Kickstarter in time to get that extra figure that I should have gotten it? And I think there's a way of doing it where you can still accommodate. So I don't mind having a slightly larger box to accommodate stuff in the future because I like being able to put everything in one box. But when it comes to a smaller game, that becomes the challenge. I haven't had that experience much with smaller games because I feel like the smaller games tend not to have the expansions that much. They're meant
Yeah.
to, get to, it tends to be a smaller experience in general. There are smaller games that are different than that. Like Set a Watch is like a lot of game packed into a small box, but I don't mind if there's extra space. I really don't mind. I don't mind making the room because again, it gets me excited knowing that there's more coming down the line, that I'm going to have
Yeah.
more experience coming down the line. So I'm totally cool with that. But when it gets too big and it feels like there's too much emptiness at the beginning to make room for what's coming later, then you
Mhm.
sort of have the double-edged sort of, yay, and why don't I have it now? So
Right.
it's definitely a delicate balance for sure.
And part of the balance, I would say, from the shipping perspective is if a box is really, really big, that it means that you can put fewer of them in a carton and then fewer of them
That's
on a
true.
pallet. And
Yep.
so that is always a consideration. Like, how do we make this box the right size for an uncertain future of expansions where we hope we have expansion content, but we don't really know.
Yeah.
We don't know what that content is yet. And yet for right now, we want to make sure we can fit as many as possible on the pallet. Um, so there's always that push and pull. I can say
I
that
didn't think of that
that's
too.
one
Yeah.
thing where there isn't a right answer. There's just considerations.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's good. But you know what? It's good to have the conversation because people listen. They go,
yeah,
"Yeah, I guess if we're going to have a bigger box, maybe don't make it look empty, but give the room again," which is
right,
something that you guys have always done really well. So, yeah, there you
yeah.
go.
And we'll talk about a game. We'll talk about expeditions a little bit later on,
It's coming
in
up again.
reference to the box size. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. That's the category of packaging. And yeah, great to hear your thoughts on that one. Let's move on to the category of beauty.
Oh, pretty.
Beauty aesthetics. So I think the original question you had for this that we added on to was custom dice. When a game
Yes.
has standard D6 dice,
Yeah.
uh, why include like literally standard like 6 pip, 1 to 6 pip dice? I added on if a game has unique resources or has different resources in the game, why just use cubes instead of unique resource shapes? And taking it a step further, for some games have like nice silkscreen printed meeples. Why not every game? Why doesn't every game do that? And then my coworker actually added on at the last minute. What about elements of whimsy and Easter eggs in games? Why doesn't
Oh
every
yeah.
game uh, have a little bit of whimsy in it, or a little hint at their favorite animal or where the company is located? All those little Easter eggs that can be in the game but don't always go there. So
Absolutely.
go ahead, Mitchell. What are your
By the way,
thoughts on this
just
category?
I don't know if
Yeah.
you knew this. This could take 2 seconds to tell you. Car manufacturers doing Easter eggs now too. They're
Oh, really?
hiding like symbology, history of the car, little. I mean,
Yeah.
car manufacturers doing this all over, and you have to look under things to find them, which I think is a very interesting place to find Easter eggs. You would not think buying a new automobile would be a place to find them, but they're kind of doing that. So, okay, enough with that.
That's really neat.
So, like you said, let's start with the custom dice. So,
Yeah.
I have been known to possibly. Oh, look at those beautiful little chunky dice from Euphoria, beautiful. I have been known to buy a game simply because of beautiful dice. Now, I know that's shameful, and I have to obviously like what I see of the game as well. But custom dice, they just add so much for me personally. And again, we all grew up playing games that had the typical, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the pips on the white
Mhm.
die. Fine, it's great. It's kind of boring at this point. And when I look at a game and I think to myself, would it have killed them to put a little color on there, make it translucent? Could they have
Uh-huh.
put like custom symbols? And again, there are some games that just, listen, everyone's played Farkle and Yahtzee, and we've had many experiences with where those 6-pip traditional dice have come in handy. But if you're not making a new version of Yahtzee or Farkle, what is the reasoning behind not having something beautiful? And you look again, what did I put? I think I put in there Dice Throne and
Uh-huh.
Champions of Midgard, Euphoria. Dice Throne, Champions of Midgard, both have beautiful dice, both for different reasons. I think
Mhm.
Dice Throne, it really goes into the theme of the game because they could have done 1 through 6 if they really wanted to. Because at the end of the game, it is like a battle Yahtzee kind of game. But it really adds to the theme, especially because they've skinned the game in different ways with Marvel and like the D&D sort of theme. So thematically, I thought it was really cool that they did that. And a game like Champions of Midgard, I think the way the game worked, you needed the custom symbols because the game relied on those custom symbols that were not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pips. So they really did it for different reasons, even though it fed into the theme a little bit with Midgard, but mostly just they needed those custom symbols on there and the dice look beautiful. So it always kills me with it. It's an opportunity to make your game look a little different and pop a little bit. And I just wonder, is the expense or dice super expensive to make? And again, I know there are different kinds. You have like heat transfer, you have translucent, there are different materials you can use. But how much does, having just even basic colored dice, translucent dice, add to the cost of a game? And for you, do you look at it and say, is it worth it? It's not worth it. You guys always have custom dice, in all of your games. So is it something that you look at and think, well, this is just not, obviously it's worth it to you, but for other manufacturers and other, producers, developers, designers, why do we not see it more often?
So I have a theory because on the expense side, the cost, it is probably one of the easiest costs that I can ever approve in a budget, because it is a one-time sunk cost to make a custom mold for a die. So even if we're just talking, like I love custom dice that are beyond the standard D6, but even for a standard D6 die, like in Euphoria, like I was showing a second ago, that is a standard D6 die, and it is a one-time custom mold cost, and then we have that mold forever, and the cost from then on is the same as if we were making standard 1 to 6 pip dice. So that to me is almost a no-brainer, as long as you know the option is there. It is a low one-time cost. The only side of it that is maybe on the flip side is clarity. Maybe. And I say this because even in Euphoria, these are actually not the current Euphoria dice, because we found for standard 6-pip dice, 1 to 6 pip dice, I think our brains have seen them so many times that we can very quickly look at, a Yahtzee roll and know what numbers are there.
You don't have to focus on it.
Yeah. Whereas with Euphoria, I think we actually made a little bit of a mistake with these dice, where the 2, at a quick glance, the 2 and the 3 were sometimes confused at a quick glance. It's clear right now when we're looking at the picture, right? But when you're rolling the dice in that moment, you might make a mistake. So we actually shifted the design for the 3 later on, so it's more of like a triangle after we realized that. But I think that is maybe the one reason I think that maybe you might consider not doing it. But beyond that, I think it can really be a nice thematic touch that does not add that much cost to the game at all. And then you talk about the other fancy elements. You can add curved edges to the dice. You can add multiple colors to like we have those in Rolling Realms. We have these bigger dice that are multiple colors. There's so many little things that you can do that do cost a little bit more. And eventually you start stacking up those costs so that it is maybe too much. But it isn't that much. I think it's one of the easier things to say, yes, I want this standout component because it stands out. It looks good in photos. People get excited to roll the dice that look special. Yeah.
It just feels good. And it looks good. It adds a little something. So you heard that, folks. You heard that, all you other designers and publishers out there, you have no excuse to not make our games beautiful and look different, look like it's an opportunity. Again, it's an opportunity to, even if a game isn't thematic in terms of its mechanisms, it's an opportunity to make theme with the visuals, which sometimes is just enough to make people go, oh wow, that is really cool. And when you walk by, when you're walking in a convention, you walk by a table, you're like, oh, what's that? I want to see what that is. It's an easy thing to see. So, that was one aspect, but you mentioned other beauty aspects. You talked about like silk screening components. That again, for me, having more than just a plain wooden cube. Again, I'm not trying to wooden cube shame anyone. If that's your jam, go in peace, enjoy it. I see wooden cubes and I get the heebie-jeebies. It's just me. Even if I could have like the little plastic cubes with the rounded edges, I love those. Or like you said, realistic resources, which you guys have done. There are other games that have done beautiful realistic, and I would imagine when it comes to realistic resources, when you're going away, even if just a plastic cube, which is an upgrade over the wooden cube, visually to me, with the color and what you're able to do with it, I understand that making resources, those can probably get a little more expensive, because now sometimes you're dealing with like painting them and making sure the coloring is right. The shape of them is kind of a unique shape. So realistic resources, out of all the things we've talked about, is that probably the most complex and most expensive part?
Yeah, if you're doing really fancy, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the deluxeification category near the
Yeah.
end, but that does add a significant cost. But if we're just talking
Yeah.
about taking a cube versus another wooden component that looks like a bag of gold or
Yes.
a piece of steel, that cost is very minimal. There is a difference. There is a slight difference in cost, but it really is minimal. And although I will say, Mitchell, this is a subjective element. I think there are people
Yes.
who do like cubes.
Oh, yeah. I know there
I
are.
don't quite understand it. I think it's easier to understand a
I
game
don't
when you don't have to
understand
teach
it.
like
Right.
if I have to teach you what each cube is versus just showing you the shape of the metal. Like I don't have to.
That looks
If
like
I
a
show
rock.
you, it looks
Yeah.
like a rock. Yeah, you know
Yeah.
it's a rock. I don't have to say
Yeah.
this is the rock token or this.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's easier to
That is a
teach.
spoon. Yes.
Yeah.
No, I
That's
totally get that. And by the way, there's one
yeah.
more game that have you ever played Fire Tower? Fantastic
Mm.
fun game. I think you'd really enjoy. You're basically controlling fire to burn down other people's towers, and there's a mechanism where you're controlling, the direction of the wind, and you're trying to mitigate that with different cards. They have these delightful plastic. They look like splashes of translucent fire. They're orange, and people
Oh,
always
cool.
walk by when we're playing, and go, "What is that?" So, I mean, having something that looks a little different makes a difference in
Yeah.
terms of the visuals and people wanting to, or just drawing people into the game. Again, at the end of the day, a good game is a good game. Doesn't matter if it's plastic cubes, marshmallows, whatever. A good design is a good design. But when you have a good design with that extra little pop, I think, to a gamer like me who's shameless and loves the pretty, come on, I can't help myself.
Yeah, for that, I am the same way. I really like, even if it's the standard version of the game, I really like when there's like one really standout component. And so even just picking one thing to go a little bit above and beyond,
Agree.
whether it's the custom dice, whether it's the cubes to special resources, silk screen printing does cost extra, and you have to decide: are
Right.
we going to silk screen print on one side or both sides? Because it's a lot more expensive to do it on both sides than just on one side.
Right.
And
Even
then
a
the Easter
gold
eggs.
foil stamp. Oh,
And the
sorry.
gold foil
Yeah,
stamps, yeah,
even the gold foil
it's
stamp. I mean, it makes it something special. But yeah, the Easter egg too. The Easter egg is super cool.
yeah, and Easter eggs don't add any cost. The only reason I can think that someone might not do Easter eggs is if they don't want to, if they don't want whimsy, like if the theme of the game is not whimsical and they're trying to avoid
Right.
any sort of whimsy, or not breaking any immersion. Like I just played the new Star Wars deck building game yesterday. If they
You
tried
got
to
yours
sneak
already.
in,
Yeah.
it's awesome. Yeah, if they had tried to sneak in an Easter egg of like the designer's cat, suddenly that cat is canon to Star Wars. They can't
Right.
do that. They can't do that with a license. I understand why they can't do that. Although they can include Star Wars Easter eggs, which I think is great, and they probably do on some of the cards. Yeah.
But let's face it, let's be honest, Jamie. If some designer was going to put an Easter egg with a cat, it would be you.
And it
would
has
be
been
you.
me.
Come on.
many
I know it
times.
has.
Yeah.
Thank God it has been. We love it. So it's great.
So that is the category of beauty. And again, I'm really looking forward to what people say in the comments about each of these categories too.
Oh, me too.
I'm looking forward to the examples. The next category is almost the opposite: utility.
Yes.
This is the category where we're talking about dual layered player boards. Why don't all games have dual layered player
Yes.
boards or player mats or the game board itself? Why don't it's really two things here: the dual layered player boards and rounded. I added rounded corners on mats, like rather than having a hard square edge. Why
Right.
not have like a more elegant rounded edge? Why not have that? So why don't you talk about, I know you had some thoughts about dual layered player boards and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, this feeds, at first I thought, oh, this feeds again into the aesthetic. I just like seeing and the tactile, because it's gaming is a very tactile thing as well. You're touching components, so the way things feel, and not just the way things look, it's the way things feel also. And the dual layer board, they're just so thick and chunky, which again, I'm sure cost is there as well. And you feel like the little, oh, there you go, look at that. And I love the way it looks, and I love the way it organizes, and we were just playing, and we're going to talk about, I think we're going to talk about a lot of these games later. What was it? Was it Spots we were playing? Which doesn't have it. Again, it's a small box game, and it's totally understandable, but pieces and dice, things are easily moved or shuffled off the table. How many times have you played a game? And I'm asking you, Jamie, and everyone that's watching, have you played a game where somebody accidentally, you reach for something, you bump somebody's board, and your wooden cubes, shameful, get shuffled around, or suddenly your tracker is moved. Something falls off, and it's like, where was that? Oh my God, what was my health at? Because the health dial was just a written, a printed out dial, and I had to put a peg on it, and there was nothing in there. So there's so many times where I've said, why? man, why doesn't every game have dual layer boards? Because it would really forget the aesthetics. It would just really help to not have something knocked and to keep track of things, to make things better overall. So for me, I think it went past aesthetics and really fell into utility. And there's a game that does it really well, Sky Team as well. And again, Sky Team is a smaller box game, bigger experience in the smaller box, but a smaller box, but everything has a little place. Again, there's a lot going on the board there as well, but it really helps to keep things organized. And if, like I said, if you've ever had anything knocked or had somebody accidentally knock your bits off or take we call it wild rolling, wild rolling when someone rolls and they knock your dice all over the place. It just, why doesn't every game have it? Because I know there's got to be cost involved. I know it's got to take up. So please tell me.
Well, so there are some reasons why I think it is troublesome to do. And I'll keep expeditions up here as a partial example, because so I completely agree with what you're saying, that if you bump the table, if you bump your own mat, and doing so prevents you from resetting to where you were, that is a problem in games. And it's the reason that we did it in Scythe. And Scythe, I think, was one of the first games that had dual layered mats like this, because I realized this is a big problem. Like if I bump my player mat, it happened during playtesting all the time when I was just using pieces of paper printed off my printer. I could not remember where all the cubes went. It was too much information to remember. Whereas with expeditions, I didn't make it as high of a priority in the original game, and still actually in the current game, for another reason. But I didn't make it as high of priority because there are only 3 tokens. So if I do bump the mat, I'm probably going to remember where they were, or at least very close to it, to not make that big of a difference. Whereas if there were, I don't know, 18 different tokens on here, there's no way I can remember that much information. I can't remember the status at all times. The problems with dual layered mats that I've documented are warping is an issue because you're gluing multiple layers together. So warping, there's a greater chance that it can happen. We use high density cardboard that reduces the chances of that happening. But then you put that cardboard in different environments, hotter environments, colder environments, environments with more moisture, less moisture, and warping can still happen. It can still happen over time. Warping can really happen to any component. It's just a higher chance of happening with a dual layered mat. It does cost more. It's more graphic design, because the graphic designer is actually creating 3 layers of things instead of 1 layer. And can you get it to fit in the box, because you're making it much thicker? And that is actually the reason that I didn't do it in the original expeditions, because I thought it would have made them too thick to fit. Eventually I found a way to do it by having a thinner, I believe the top layer is thinner, maybe the bottom layers. One of the layers is really much thinner than the other, and we were able to get it to fit in that way. Now, you mentioned Sky Team. Sky Team, I think, doesn't have 2 layers that are glued together, right? Doesn't it use stickers or some other way? The player actually puts together with stickers when you actually get it, so that that was kind of an interesting thing. I was like, okay, there's an interesting solution. And listen, if I had to do that with other games, if I had to build it myself, I'd be on board with that. I'd be fine with that. And I was thinking, again, it's important that people, me included, hear this. So we're not totally being selfish and thinking, there's no reason. They can't have a reason. It looks better. It's more functional. So it is good to know about cost, about worries about warping, and the integrity of the game itself over the long term. And then, I'm always impressed when people are able to do it on a lower priced game. We've talked about when we did our, my endlessly long top 10 list together. I talked about Destinies, which is one of my favorite games also. And Destinies, from Lucky Duck Games, really fun adventure app driven game, a lot of fun. And they actually have really some of the nicest dual layer boards I've ever seen. And this is a game that has a bunch of miniatures, dual layer boards, chunky. That's almost like the holy grail of everything we talked about so far. And it's everything we talked about. And I think it's like a $40-something game, and they pack a ton into this box. I was thinking, well, if they can do, I can everything. But again, you talk about logistics, you talk about the process, and although they have the miniatures are tiny. There's not a whole lot stuffed into the box, because the app is actually able to do a lot of the heavy lifting and the tracking. And even on the dual layer board for that, there's not a ton going on, but I do appreciate that it is dual layer and it keeps track of everything. So, but it's good to know. It's good to hear that. It's good to know it isn't just, obviously it wasn't laziness, because, board game designers and publishers are anything but lazy, but it's good to hear the other side of it. That being said, I'd still be willing to build it myself. Just include a little double-sided tape, couple of boards. You don't have to build it, or we'll do it. We'll do the heavy lifting. Just give us the parts in there. I'm happy to do it myself. And that is something I've talked to our manufacturer about as well, because that actually does reduce the chances of it warping when you do that. Yeah, so
I like that.
I think that's a good option to have. And then I
Oh,
mentioned the
okay, good.
rounded corners too. I know it's a small
Yes.
thing, but I think it does. We were working on our next game recently, and the first version of it had a mat, a board with square edges, and we like couldn't quite put our finger on what was off about it. It just looked a little prototypey, and then we were like, oh, we should just round the edges, and we did that, and it makes it look that much nicer, and it reduced it. We were talking about packaging and things shifting around in the box. When you have rounded edges instead of hard edges, that you can't dent them as easily when you bump that corner against something and it
They get
folds.
frayed.
If it's rounded,
Oh,
it
yeah.
doesn't do that as easily. So I think it's worth, and really I don't think that costs anything extra. You just have to literally just remember to do it in the graphic design stage, and then you have it.
And listen, the hard corners have been like a board game staple for like
Right.
100 years. I mean, it's like we've seen those things for years. So it's
Yeah.
nice aesthetically. It also like brings in like a new era of gaming when you see that round. It's like, oh, it has a different presence on the table. So it's funny
Yeah.
that was, you couldn't quite put your finger on it, but it's funny that was what it was.
Yeah. So
Okay,
that's a good category of utility. The next category is onboarding. So I posed this question last week during my live cast. A lot of people have thoughts about onboarding. How do you invite people into the game for the first time? Having recommended complexity levels for different asymmetric elements, having a tutorial. If the back page of the rulebook has icons or a quick reference guide, if you have a complete appendix versus a partial appendix, do you offer a rules video for some people who prefer to learn from a video instead of the rulebook? Do you have this was something that I had not even thought of. Someone mentioned this on the live cast. Why doesn't every game have a featured reminder on the back page or somewhere, maybe on the reference guides, of what each player starts with, especially if like player 1 starts with something that's different than player 2? And
wow.
the rulebook
Yeah.
size as well. Like why aren't rulebooks all sized a little bit small so you can keep it next to you on the table, opposed to a giant rulebook that like folds out and you can't ever keep it next to you? Why don't all games
Wow.
have all these onboarding elements?
That's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff.
It's a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Let's go with okay. So I personally try to follow Jamie's lead when it comes to a lot of his lists, and he sort of keeps Stonemaier games separate because he's a gentleman when it comes to that stuff and wants to make sure he's not talking about his own games endlessly. Even though I'd like it if he did, that would be fine by me. I'm going to bring up Tapestry here. Just because it does so many things right in terms of, and again, we're not talking about a super low complexity game. It's not a low complexity game at all. It's a thinky game. It's a great Civ building game. And what I like there are many things I like here. First of all, the fact that not only are there so many Civs to begin with, the fact that there were so many added, the fact that Jamie went out of his way to make sure, okay, here are the more complex. If you want to start off, maybe start off with these civilizations, which again, helps new players, helps existing players, try to help new players. Again, to me, what you did, you sort of made it a living rule book by updating the rule book, updating the rules so people understood. And a lot of publishers and designers do not do this. It's like, well, people figured out, or they have, they go online, they can read, okay, they'll figure everything out. But no, I almost feel like this is a living game where things were updated as you go along. Balance issues. I didn't personally have any balance issues, but you heard that some people did. So you made sure, okay, how can we rebalance this to make this a better experience for everyone? The rule book is properly laid out and explains things incredibly well. These things to me are all about this topic of onboarding, of not only just making it easy for people to know what they're getting into, to make it a better experience for newer players, to make it a better balanced game so that everyone has a good experience. And the fact that you're willing to make adjustments as time goes on, because a lot of people, Jamie, let's face it, and again, this isn't a criticism of other designers or publishers. Once the game's out, it's out, and we have to go on to the next thing. It's a business.
Right.
We have to go on to the next thing. So I'm not saying there's any malice or any ill intent at all, but I think it shows a lot of pride on your side, and the gamer in you wants to make sure that your games, once they're out, that they're sort of living entities as much as they can be for the players to still have good experiences. And if something was like, oh, we didn't think of that. Yeah, we can make that better in the next print, or we can add this, or we can add errata built into the rulebook. And I think that's something that you guys do incredibly well. And I wish I'd see other publishers doing, even though I know always logistically, because it's a machine, a lot of times it's not possible to do that. So is that something, I mean, that you I know it must be something you think about as a gamer, not only a designer and publisher, just to make sure your games have legs and are continue to be enjoyed over time by people?
Yes, yeah, and I'll talk about Tapestry specifically in a second, but yes, like I consider every one of our games to be both final and living at the same time. Like we are
Right.
constantly trying to make, if we are doing reprints of our games, which we hope to do, we're hoping to make every reprint just a tiny little bit better if there is the opportunity to do so. Always in terms of clarity, or almost always in terms of clarity. Sometimes we tweak little mechanisms here and there, but very small things. But yeah, in terms of better balance, better clarity, how can we make this version even slightly better than the last printing? And Tapestry, I think, is a big example of that. And Tapestry, I think, certainly has its flaws in sort of in terms of certain elements of this category. It has a rule book that is only 4 pages, which is nice, but it's also a big rule book. It was one of our last full size rule books until we
Right.
shifted to the smaller size that we have in like Stamp Swap here, which is next to me, because a rule book of this size, like in Stamp Swap, can sit on the table next to you. It's easy for you to open and
Oh,
see 2
gotcha.
pages, like hold it like a book in your hands. I think this size is a little friendlier for onboarding. And even with Tapestry, the idea of having recommended complexity levels, or which sieves do you start with, which ones do not. As a designer, some designers can do this better than I can for sure. As someone who is so close to the game, I have a really hard time telling which civilizations are easier or harder to start out with. And so it took feedback from people who have played Tapestry a lot to figure out which ones those are, and we
Right.
added that element in the latest printings of Tapestry and
Right.
the revised Civ pack. But that for me is just, I'm too close to the game to do a good job of doing that. So maybe I need to, if we have those sorts of asymmetrical elements in the future, I need to lean on people who are a little bit better than that. Like in I have Apiary up on the screen here. Connie did that with having starter factions in Apiary,
Right.
because she's better at doing that than I am. Yeah.
Well, it's also incredibly subjective, right? Some people might look at that, "Oh,
Yeah.
are you kidding? I had a great time with that. I had no problem figuring out the
Right.
mechanisms, and, I could," and people are like, "Really? I was struggling with it." So, again, but again, to be open to getting that feedback from the game players, from your fans, and listening, going, "Okay, we're seeing a lot of people. If enough people are saying this, I didn't feel that way, but you know what? Maybe I'm too close, or maybe I had a different experience at the table," because it's very experiential. I mean, people have very different experiences doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's good that you're even open to getting that mass amount of information and saying, okay, let's take this and make this, which I think it's funny though, that the game that I'm using it as an example of this category. You're like, yeah, but I could have done better. Even now you're like, yeah, but I could have done better. I mean, again, that shows but that shows how you look at things as a designer, as a publisher, and more importantly, as a gamer. Because a lot of times people take, they leave the business element in, they take their gamer head out of it. And sometimes you need that gamer head to say, well, if I was playing this, here's what I'd want. And you can never
Yes.
forget that. And it's hard sometimes when you get so close to something, right?
And really, it's one of the steps that we've added to our creation process that has really helped me is after doing all the playtesting of the prototype version of the game, when we send the files to the printer, we complete the game. When the printer sends us the pre-production copy, we now sit down as a team and play that copy, having not played the game in a while. So on some sort of a level, some people are learning the game for the first time. And even me, having played the game so much, I am relearning the game a little bit for the first time. And that's the moment where I'm like looking at the back of the rule book, where I realize, oh, wow, we didn't put reference cards in here, or we only put one reference card. We need to have one per player. Like, actually playing the game in that environment after distancing myself from the game is super helpful to figure out what elements are missing.
Was the reference card part of this category, part of a different one? Because I was like, oh, that's something I definitely wanted to.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in
that was part of accessibility. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Because I was afraid, oh my God, I didn't mention that's another like hot issue for me, right?
Yeah. A few other elements here, and feel free to let me know if you want to elaborate on them, are well, I mentioned that, like, having a featured reminder of starting components per player. I hadn't even thought of that, but I really like having that. Why doesn't every game have a complete appendix of all cards? And in my opinion, if I have a game with text on cards, it's my responsibility to have the text so that it doesn't need a further explanation if possible. I think it is still nice to have an appendix, but I think ideally you would not ever need to reference that. At the same time, I think Elizabeth, for example, does a great job of putting the text on cards in Wingspan. We still have an appendix in Wingspan. Same with Connie and Apiary. We still have an appendix in Apiary. But that is my thinking. If we have room to put full text on cards, it's the problem of the card if it isn't explained fully there, if we actually
Right.
need an appendix for it.
I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. And, you know, and again, different games have different ways of going about this. There's certain
Mhm.
games that give you a quick rule teach at the beginning, a quick
Yeah.
explanation of mechanisms and how cards work. And then they give you a round to play of the game. Then you might have questions about how that round worked, and then they have more specific explanations. So I've seen this handled in different ways, where it could either be handled through an appendix, through an index,
Mhm.
or through the tutorial itself.
Right.
Explanation of starting components you talked about, which is also really
Yeah.
big, because sometimes that's just not there. And I find a lot of the times that Kickstarter games may be a little more not a little better about this, a little more specific when it comes to starting components, because they have to deal with separating what's happening in the main box versus what Kickstarter people have gotten in their pledges. So
Right.
they kind of make it clear, even though you have all this stuff, just know you're starting
Mhm.
with this. So I think for a different
Mhm.
reason, Kickstarter games might be better about it, because they have to differentiate, oh, which version of the game are people playing? We have to make sure we give the base components first and let the Kickstarter people know. And they sometimes they have an extra Kickstarter page, like, if you're getting this pledge, thank you, and here's what you're getting at the beginning, but
Right.
make sure you know. So I think there are certain
Yeah.
reasons why maybe Kickstarter is a little better at it, but I love knowing initial components to start with, what comes in the box, things that
Yeah.
logistically seem very simple, but make a difference when you get a whole bunch of stuff in a box and go, it's beautiful,
Yeah.
but what the heck do I do with it? So I think all these things
Right.
are very helpful.
We also, real briefly, we talked about rules video. Why doesn't
Yes.
every game have a rules video? The simple
Rodney
answer
Smith.
is it costs money. Rodney is good because he costs money, and I think
Yes,
sometimes smaller creators don't have those funds. Rodney also can't do this for every game, so he has to pick and choose the games that he does it for and watch
correct.
it played. Um,
How does
and
he
then
flip that lid every time and it's always standing straight up when he catches it? You ever notice
it's
that?
magical. I don't know
It's
how he does
magic.
it.
And I'm looking for the cuts. I don't see them. He's a magician, but go ahead. I digress. Go ahead.
And then tutorials. I don't think every game needs a full tutorial,
Mm-mm.
but I appreciate adventure games when they have a tutorial. I
Yes,
appreciate when they have it.
me too.
Um, and then a lot of these things are little things like the what do you do with the back page of the rulebook? For a long time, I put like links to videos, links to replacement parts. It is fine to do that, but the back page is so helpful because the rulebook, when it's on the table, is either always on the front page or it's on the back page. And you
Right.
might as well have useful content there. This is Stamp Swap I'm holding up. It has like a quick overview of how you play, gameplay overview. You can have icons on the back if you have a game that has a lot of icons on it. I think that is a good space to put that sort of content.
Quick little plug for
Yeah.
Stonemaier Games. If you go to the Stonemaier Games homepage, they've done something quite delightful. You have the center that has all the information, then you have the borders, which you can, make customized.
Yeah.
The borders of the Stonemaier right now homepage have a lot of the stamps from stamps, so it looks
That's
amazing.
understands.
So
Yeah.
I just saw that today for the first time. I don't know how long that's been up. It might have been up for the last few
I'll
days,
pull it
but
up.
I'm waiting
Yeah.
to get my
Oh, here.
copy. I know it's shipped. I'm exciting, but yeah, the little stamps. There you go.
Yeah.
I love the borders. See, you can even customize and make your homepage look even brighter by putting up, stuff from your own games. I think that looked awesome. I wanted to mention that today.
Thanks, Mitchell. Yeah. That's our web developer. He does that fancy stuff.
Great job. It looked awesome.
So that's onboarding. We have 3 categories left.
Yes.
You okay on time to still do these 3
Are you
categories?
kidding? I'm worried
Yeah.
about talking too much, so you can go as far along as you want. I'm good.
Hey, this is Jamie from the future, a future in which I know that this conversation with Mitchell is going to go on a little long. Not in a bad way, just in a way that's way longer than most of my Sunday videos. So we've decided to cut this video in half. At this point in the video, I don't have any questions for you beyond what we've already talked about in the video, so feel free to join me in the comments to talk about the topics that we've already covered. And we'll be back in the future, probably the very near future, for part 2, which is already filmed, already complete. And I look forward to concluding the conversation with Mitchell. I had a great time with this conversation. So yeah, let me know in the comments what you think about the talk so far and some of the games that you think of and when you think of what we've discussed so far. Thanks.